other down. We'll believe in freedom, get married until it's won.
Greetings and welcome to Love in Public, sponsored by Sarah Jones Law PA. At Love in Public, we discuss issues of social, economic, and community justice in a way that's accessible and relatable to everyday people. I'm your host, Sara Jones. And today's guest is Nicola Robinson. I'm so excited to have Nicola on the show with us. I love talking to Nicola, y'all. So y'all are gonna get kind of a sneak preview into our sort of relaxed conversation that we like to have, but I'm excited to do that. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Nicola.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Sarah. I am Nicola Robinson. I am the co-owner of the SR Law Group here in Douglasville, Georgia.
So where's Douglasville?
Right outside of Atlanta. So you know Atlanta, and if you go through Atlanta and you hit Alabama, you just passed Douglasville.
So I had to go ahead and make you shout out your Atlanta, because Nicola is a true Atlanta girl. And I found that out my first conversation with her. And I'm real Lake Wales, and nobody knows what Lake Wales is. But I was sort of born and raised here, and so everybody knows your hometown, or at least they think they know it. And so I love talking to you about Atlanta. But I want to talk to you today about what you do for a living. So you are actually, I think you're my first attorney that I've had on the show.
All right. I feel special.
So, Love in Public is about social, economic, and community justice. And I think that what you do for a living is all three of those things. And so I'm super excited about it. Tell us what you do and why I'm talking about it.
Okay, so I am an estate planning and elder law attorney by trade. I work primarily with African Americans. I mean, real talk, I don't really want to work with other groups.
Well, we say Black people on this show all the time.
And I do this, it's a passion project for me. I have seen in my own family where when there is no estate plan, what will happen to the family, the discord, the loss of land and wealth. And so I have really made it my mission and my life's goal to help other families and educate them about putting something in place so that they don't lose the generational wealth. I think that African American families and communities suffer because we're not educated. We're not educated on how to pass what we work so hard for to the next generation. And a lot of times other groups they prey on us. They know that we're not educating ourselves. They know that we're not doing the proper legal work to make sure that we have a succession plan in place, to make sure land that's been in our family for generations continues to stay in our family. I tell people around me all the time, and you see it especially in Atlanta, a Black community that's gone back to civil rights and beyond, and now it's a Starbucks and a Trader Joe's. And I said that was no plan in place. The Black people had no plan in place. And so the white developers and these white communities came in and they bought it for next to nothing, and they turned it into what they wanted to be. They saw the value long before we did. And that's the unfortunate side of it. So that's what I do in a nutshell. I save Black communities.
You do, you really do. And, there's not many people who do what it is you do, especially not for the reason that you do it. And we need one of you down here.
Get you one. I keep saying I'm gonna try to find you one and send you one, but no, I get
or y'all can just expand,
My second location.
So let's break it down a little bit. Talk to us about what an estate plan is.
So most people, when they think estate plan, they're thinking Vanderbilts and people of extreme wealth. It's not. An estate plan consists of your assets. What is you own? The house you live in, the clothes on your back, the car you drive, all of that comprise of your estate. And then we take all of that and create a plan for it. So very, very common, people are like, oh, a will. A will is one part of your estate plan. You really, and I tell people all the time, a will just dictates what happens to your belongings when you're dead. There is a period between living your best life and death, and that is called sickness. That is called cancer. That is called heart disease. That's called having a stroke. Do we have the documents in place that's going to be able to help your family make decisions on your behalf and be able to pay your bills and be able to get things done, because we see people lose stuff in that place. When I was about 17, and I tell this story often because it really impacted me. My mom's best friend ran an in-home daycare. We was over there all the time as kids. And one of her neighbors, I remember going over there, and all his stuff was outside. And so I asked about him, and I was just like, well, what happened? Like, it didn't look like he moved out, because clearly everything was sitting on the lawn. And she said he'd been in the hospital. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, why is his stuff outside? Because he's in the hospital. And she was like, I guess nobody was paying his bills while he was in the hospital. So the bank foreclosed on his house.
Wow.
And there was no plan, there was no documents, there was no one that could talk to that mortgage company, to explain to them what the situation was, or to be able to even make those payments for him.
Right.
And this was certainly before the days of where people do online payment and stuff like that. But imagine that man was in there fighting for his life, and now he don't have a place to come home to that he's had for years because there was no plan.
I mean, even in the days of online payment,
Yeah.
I know my husband had a relative who was evicted while she was in the hospital. And luckily, my husband was able to be there and move her stuff and, put her in an apartment that we own. But had that not been the case, she doesn't have any children. And so there was no real plan in place. She didn't expect to be sick. She didn't expect to be ill. And she was actually a nurse who got sick while working at a hospital,
Right.
and even under those circumstances, it was really tough for her, and she really needed other people to make a plan in an emergency of what we thought was best. And of course, there was some friction later about what she would have done, but she hadn't made a plan.
And
And that's
when you
important to
make a
consider.
plan, that gives you an opportunity to have a voice in what you want to see happen.
Hmm.
She had friction because she probably would have wanted it done differently. Well, you should have wrote it down. We're doing the best we can with the situation at hand. And so I tell people, doing an estate plan gives you a voice in how you want emergencies handled. It gives you a voice in how you want your things passed to whoever you want them to, whether it be your kids, whether you want to be your neighbors. It gives you the opportunity to make sure your wishes are crystal clear. And that's what I help people do. It really is planning for I tell people, I minimize risk. I can't make you not have cancer. I can't make your wife, not run off with the pool boy or whatever. But I can minimize the amount of just discord and chaos that your family is going to have to deal with if they don't know what your wishes are in a medical emergency. I can minimize how much of your money goes with your wife in that divorce when she marries the next person, because you put the right things in place. So that's what I do.
That's awesome. So there's an issue that I know you and I have been talking about, but something that's really big here, and I'm sure in a lot of Black communities, but we have huge heirs property issues.
Yes.
So first of all, can you explain to us what heirs property is, why it's important not to have your property turn into heirs property, and sort of some of the things that you talk to your clients about when you're talking about what to do with their real property?
So I'm gonna keep this real 100, because this is Black people. This is Black people wanting to do some bootleg stuff. Stop it, y'all! Stop it. What happens is
Say it again, one more time. Say it.
stop it.
Say
Listen, Big Ma owned the house. She died. One of your cousins moved in. Then nobody has ever changed the deed. Nobody has ever gone through the legal channels to make sure that the ownership of that property goes to the next
So
generation.
tell everybody who owned Big Ma house when Big Ma passed.
Girl, however many kids Big Ma left behind. Now they
But
all
that's not what the property appraiser say. That's not what the tax deed say. Who owns that property?
it's going to eventually be the county.
But it says the estate of Big Ma.
Estate of Big Ma.
And Big Ma ain't here, and she can't do nothing, and neither can you, because it's not in your name.
And what happens is, because they never went through probate court, which is a whole nother animal, Big Ma's name is still on everything. Then everybody moves in. Then all her kids, in essence, have some interest in that property. One child is living in the house. One child is paying for the taxes and this other stuff. And then another child moves in with all her kids. Then she dies, and then her kids are still living in the property. And so you have multiple generations owning some interest in the property. And that's what essentially heir property becomes. It's where you can't, it gets so messy trying to figure out how many people, which person owns 1/10 share, 1/18 share of that property, because people never went through the legal channels to make sure that the title was always following the generation that actually owned it.
Why is that important?
Girl. You see such a mess with it, because now we got to try to track down people. Now we got to try to figure out when there's blight in the community. That's where we usually see a lot of it. It's because people have kind of abandoned the property. Nobody knows who actually owns the property. And then it brings down the property value for everybody in the area. So that's one of the biggest things, like, honestly. Now, in terms of families, it can create so much drama and discord. I actually just did a recent presentation for a group of realtors trying to explain this to them, and just explaining to them, when you have all those people involved and now everybody want to sell, but these people don't want to sell, and then now those that don't want to sell is trying to jack up the price and trying to mess it up for everybody else who is trying to sell. It just becomes so messy. Don't do it, y'all. It's not worth it.
Well, one of the things that I've seen is like, so I've seen families who, some people are watching this might say, I still don't see why I need to do it, because their family is still in agreement about what should happen with the property. But the more people that get involved, because you might have, like, this person might be a child right now, and
Right.
in 10 years, they say, oh, I own 1/10 of this piece of property.
Right.
I want y'all to sell it so I can get my 1/10 of money.
And that's the thing, it's multi-generational. So you're thinking about one generation might be all adults, but one of those members of that generation has passed away. And so their minor children now owns that property with the generation before them. And so you can't, as the older generation, you can't sell without the approval of those kids. Well, those kids are not in a position to make that kind of decision. So it just becomes even more of a mess. And then if the family at the higher generations like, well, to hell with it, nobody's paying the taxes, nobody's keeping up the property. And then so something that could have been of value to that family now loses its leverage, its value, and now becomes a burden instead of the blessing that it could have been.
And just to illustrate how it loses its value, what ends up happening is every home needs repairs. Every building is going to need stuff done to it. One, I find that it's a lot less likely that any one person is going to put up the money if everybody owns it. And it is very difficult for everybody to get in and put up the money. And then let's say it's a roof. Let's say you need to get the whole house replumbed because a pipe burst, or you got to get water damage corrected, and it's tens of thousands of dollars, and that might be something you need to mortgage or you need to get a loan on. Well, the bank is going to want collateral for that loan in that home, but you don't have the power to actually provide that because you don't own the home. So now the home that your grandmother spent her whole life working to pay off, it now has damage that you got to get somebody to come in and sort of bootleg fix that's not really a real fix. And don't let the city or county find out about it, because then they're going to come put liens on it because they said you didn't properly permit this work. And they're addressing them to the estate of grandma because that's who owns the house. And you may or may not even, and there may be incentive programs. There may be programs that they say, oh, we'll give you a grant that'll pay X amount of dollars or the whole amount to fix this problem, but the homeowner has to qualify.
Yes.
Well, the homeowner is not alive, so they can't qualify. And by the time you're in that position, you may have more liens on the home than the value of the home, because the value has dropped. The liens aren't being incurred, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, because whatever, and so you have this whole thing that, like you said, becomes a mess. And what was an investment becomes a mess. And so developers know how to come and get those
Oh,
liens
they are
cleared out.
literally looking for it. They are waiting. They are
Yeah.
sharks that are circling these communities because they know that's what's happening. You see it a lot with the tax sales. Grandma had that house, nobody started paying the taxes. People are just living there, and then eventually the tax commissioner is going to say, "Well, we haven't been paid." And those houses, developers go right to those auctions and they snatch them up. And that's
Hmm.
how we've lost the community that was, primarily African American, because they know that we're not doing what we need to do in terms of maintaining those properties and changing and transferring those titles.
Right. And if you think an estate planning attorney is expensive, a house is much more expensive. That you just lost a huge investment by not paying a relatively small amount to make sure your affairs are in order. And if you are the person who spent your whole life working to pay for a house, then I would suggest to you that you don't want your children to be the beneficiaries of a mess. You want them to be the beneficiaries of an investment. Um, if you're willing to, there was a little bit of a personal story that you shared about your family and the interpersonal situation that happened in your family as a result of a lack of estate planning. And even if all the legal stuff we've been talking about doesn't motivate people, sometimes their family and the things that they really care about will motivate them. And so I am on a journey to try to educate our community by almost forcing it down their throats for them to get this information because it's so important. And we're trying to clear up a lot of those problems here in terms of the ones that are past occurred. But if we keep creating heirs property, then we're never going to solve the problem. So do you mind telling that story?
I think you're talking about my grandma and this chicken farm.
Yes.
So my grandmother was my world. Like, let me also put that out there. My grandmother owned a chicken farm that had been in her family for multiple generations. It started out as a big plot of land that was pretty much given, pieces were given to different family members as they got married and they got older and all this other stuff. So my grandmother used her portion and created this chicken farm. She was my dad's stepmother. Now, she raised him, and that's the only mother that he's ever known. In fact, when my grandmother and my grandfather divorced, my dad stayed with his stepmom. He did not go with his biological father. And they had subsequent kids. So he had four half siblings with with his mother. Well, when my grandmother passed away, and although, I'm young, I've encouraged her to do a will, but she's like, I'm good. And it was always common conversation about who would get what between us. And so people always be like, well, I already told my family what I want to do. I'm telling you, that is not going to play out the way you envision. So when my grandmother passed and my dad's siblings sat us all down and was just like, well, you're not her child. And the pain that hit after that conversation is like no other. Like, it ripped our entire family thread apart because here we were now in a fight with his siblings. It caused them to not speak for many years. It's been about 10 or 11 years since I've spoken to my aunts. It's multi generational now. My kids don't know my cousin's kids. Like, the cousins don't talk anymore, and it literally ripped us all apart. And so I cannot stress enough, like, I've seen the pain in my own family, and I cannot stress enough to my clients and the people who hear me speak about, like, what legacy do you want to leave? Because that's not what my grandma would have ever wanted for her kids. Like, she was our world. She was completely the matriarch of our family. And to know now that multiple generations don't know each other and don't speak, all because there was no plan in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that it may not be a chicken farm, but it's so common, right?
It can
That
be anything, like anything. Property is, what I see the most fights about is usually the stuff that doesn't even have a monetary value. It's that emotional value for everybody. It is that true, like the family Bible that has everybody's birth and death recorded in it, and no plan as to where that's going to go.
right.
That's what really starts to rip at the fiber of a family.
What do you say to people who just don't want to think about all of this? They don't want to think about illness and death and their family fighting. They just want to go in peace.
I get it. Like, listen, I don't want to think about taxes, but I do it. It is, and we have to start thinking that way. We have to normalize this. We have to start saying, as much as I hate taxes, April 15th, let me get it done. And as much as I may not want to think about death or I may not want to plan for that, let me just get it done because I don't want to leave that kind of a mess for my family. The more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the more we prepare and just put things in place, then we take that burden off our shoulders and we don't have to, like, stress out about it. I hear from Black people all the time. The more I talk about this, I'm trying to rush it or to make it. Where did we get that, people? There is no proof, no science that supports that. That is just some myth that we have got to dispel as a community. And if you choose to just say, you know what, I want to live my life, that's a choice. You're choosing to leave a mess for your family. You are choosing to have them end up in court trying to figure out what it is they're going to end up doing. And it's expensive to go to court. Some of the people listening may have never had exposure to court, but it's expensive and it's long and it's drawn out and it's a mess that could have been prevented. So I tell people no choice is a choice. You've just chosen to give that responsibility to your children and to the next generation, and you just hoping for the best. And if that's not what you want for everybody, then you need to just go ahead and get it done.
Right. I know that a lot of the people who contact you are not actually the people who become your clients. So you make a lot of estate plans for elderly and not elderly people. But a lot of times the people who are coming to you are the people who would ultimately inherit the mess if a mess were to be left. And I think that that's a very forward thinking thing to do, is to look out for your own future interests. If you have parents that have property or you have siblings and you know you're not going to be the sole beneficiary, can you sort of talk to us about that group of people and how you are able to get them to speak with their parents and the types of things that people should say if they don't want to inherit that mess and they're trying to get their parents on board to create an estate plan?
So the conversations are hard. Let me also put that out there. And I'll do a shameless plug, but I have a podcast myself called Black Parents Aging. And that's really the point of the podcast, is to try to help, a younger generation talk to their parents about estate planning and preparing and putting things in place.
Tell us
Because
where we can find it real quick.
you can find it on all platforms that you find podcasts. So you can find it on Apple, you can find it on Stitcher or any one of the podcast platforms. So you just Google Black Parents Aging and you can find it. It'll pop up. But in our community, African American community, we don't talk about money. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about like next steps and next generations. And so we get that. And we are really trying to empower our generation to say, hey, mom and dad. And it has to be subtle. Let me tell you now, if you go charging in, telling your parents like they need an estate plan, you know how many parents come to me, tell me their kids trying to kill them. And I'm like, why do you say that? They're like, because they keep talking about I need a will. So you have to also think about our audience, like real talk. Our parents are suspicious anytime we ask about where's the bank account. They're like, why? You trying to steal all my money? It's a level of just suspicion, and it's a level of we don't talk about that. That is not a family dynamic. So
Right.
You have to go into it very creatively. You have to say, hey, mom and dad, Miss such and such up the street just got her estate plan done. Is that something you would consider? Or especially when you see your parents are starting to also show signs of sickness, or they're not in a capacity to stay maybe in the house anymore. You got to get real creative and say, hey, mom and dad, have you ever thought about where you would want to live next? Now listen, they ain't never thought about leaving their house. That's just the reality. But you've planted that seed so that they now can start thinking about, oh, wait a minute, maybe one day I'm not going to live here. And that's the first time. And so now you've cracked open the door to say, hey, have you ever thought of senior facility? Hey, have you ever, Miss such and such just moved into an assisted living. Maybe one day we should tour one. Not pushing it, but at least putting it out there so that your parents can start mentally getting on board with you, because it takes a while. So it's not, the sooner you can start having those conversations with them, the better. Because what we want to do is make sure they have the help they need as they age. If they can age in place, that's great. But the reality is most of us will not. Statistically, most of us will spend the last few years of our life in a facility. So the earlier we can start looking into that, the earlier we can start looking at the finances and figuring out how we're going to pay for that. A lot of times clients come to me and they are like super duper shocked. In Georgia, anyway, it is about, the average cost of a nursing home facility is $6,500 a month. And most
Wow.
people did not plan for that.
And even here, rough cost of an assisted living facility with a roommate, that's with somebody else living in a room with you, is about $2,500 a month.
Yeah. And so, if you wanted a private space, and assisted living tends to be a little cheaper, but when you need full 24-hour
Oh
care,
yeah, skilled nursing is expensive.
it's expensive. And so a lot of times clients are shocked about that cost, and they're just like, okay, well, I didn't plan for that. Like that wasn't on the forefront of my radar. And so they may have savings and they may have IRAs and they may have things, they put in place, but their belief was, I'm going to give that to my kids. I'm not using that to pay for me to be in a facility. And so we need to have a real conversation about, well, what can we do? Is there a way that I can protect some of those assets and still get you to be able to qualify and get into a facility if the need arises? So that's a large part of what I do with my senior population, is educating the kids to then help the parents to then be able to say, okay, we need to plan for that. We need to move and look at what our options are.
So it's interesting because it here it is a little bit different. One, I'm in Florida, so we are like the retirement state.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things that we have that is, I think, sort of unique to Florida is a right to stay at home. So up to a certain extent, there are government subsidies and programs that allow people to have individuals come out to their homes to help them, basically adapt to aging at home. Um, and a lot of people just aren't familiar with these programs, and they don't even start to learn about them until they are in a position where they need them. And a
And
lot of
we see a
times
lot of
that,
that.
go
Yeah, we
ahead.
see a lot of that because the programs are there. And usually by the time people are start looking into them, it's okay, we probably should have looked into this several months ago because the waiting lists are long.
For years.
But yeah, and so when you see now, okay, it's a 4-year waiting list, it's like, okay, we got to come up with another option. So
Mhm.
the earlier you can start making this plan and figuring out, because again, the reality is everybody wants to age at home. I certainly do.
Mhm.
And I know that's always the goal of most of my clients. But if we don't plan accordingly early enough, that's not going to happen. That won't be your reality.
Well, and sometimes it's a lot of education, right? Because we will buy car insurance, we'll even buy life insurance, but
Mhm.
I know very few Black people who have long-term care insurance.
All,
Um,
all of my clients, when I ask them, they're like, what is that?
right. So well, thank you. What is that?
Long-term care insurance is insurance to literally pay for if you had to stay in a nursing home facility. And you can buy it to pay for a number of years. Of course, you have no crystal ball. You have no idea how long you're going to be in a facility. But traditionally, people buy, say, for 5 years. Statistically, people stay in a facility for 3 to 5 years. So this will pay for the cost of that care. I tell people, get it as early as you can. Look around 65 when you're retiring. That's when your parents should really be looking at long-term care. If they're still healthy, even if as they're older, they can still qualify for long-term care insurance. But the minute they start having sickness and a couple of pre-existing conditions, it gets to be cost prohibitive if they can even qualify. A lot of times
Right.
people cannot qualify by that point. So talk to your parents, encourage them to say, let's look into this. Let's make sure that this is something we have.
Another thing I just like to add about the long-term care insurance, a lot of those policies also involve some of the things that I was talking about. It's not just care inside of a
Yeah.
facility. If you have comparable care, like let's say it's safe for you to be home, but you need a certain amount of assistance. A lot of
Mhm.
those programs cover for someone to come into your home. So if you're someone who is saying, I really want to age at home, I don't want to leave, or your parents are saying that, then long-term care insurance that covers that is something you may want to look at, because the reality is family members may not have the time or the skill to devote to people who are aging. I know that I've had family members who I've had occasion to take care of many elderly people as they were aging and as they passed. And so I have gained a lot of skills in terms of taking care of people who can't take care of themselves. And I walked into a situation with a particular family member and I'm like, whoa, 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 what are you guys doing? And they were giving their best efforts to take care of this family member, but they were doing a really, really bad job in that moment, and I don't want to criticize, because they really were doing their best, but what they were doing could have possibly caused an injury or something worse, because they just had not been trained on how to deal with a person who could not physically move themselves. And
Mhm.
that's not the same as picking up a baby. Like you can't just pick up grandma, like that. It's a totally different process, and you need somebody who is skilled and who has been trained. Like there's a reason that people go into these facilities, and it's because the people who work there have had specialized training on how to recognize certain abnormalities, how to deal with certain disabilities, and how to sort of create a situation where you can do things more safely than if you just had sort of haphazardly done them without the training. Um, have you had people who are sort of resistant to even wanting to look into the education? Like, I don't want to even know about it at all.
Oh, absolutely. Like my crystal ball in my ideal world is where people are looking into it. But no, the reality is people are still very resistant. And we still have the beliefs that I'm not gonna need that. I'm not gonna need to go into a facility. I'm not gonna need to. We don't want to think about our demise. We don't want to think about not having perfect health for the rest of our
Mhm.
lives. And so people are still always going to be resistant to it. It is just a matter of continuing to educate and then to helping people to really understand their own mortality and understanding that, like, what I know for sure is that we're all going to eventually pass on.
Yeah.
And so we just have to deal with that. But no, I wanted to just go back to your point. Caregiving is so hard. And I get clients sometimes who are just, I'm like, well, have you given any thought to sickness, and not just where your stuff is going to go when you die, but sickness, what's going to happen in that place? And they're like, oh, well, my daughter is going to take care of me. But have you talked to your daughter about that? And so many times people have not had that conversation within the family. And I'm like, well, where does your daughter live? Oh, she's in California. Okay, but you're here in Georgia. Is she
Mhm.
moving here, or are you moving to California? Nobody's talked about it.
Mhm.
Oh, your daughter has a really demanding job and three minor kids. Probably not going to go the way you envision. And
Mhm.
if you've never said anything to your daughter, she may not be able to take on that responsibility. And it's not because she doesn't love you. It's not because, there's any ill feelings or ill will. It's just, it's not practical and it's not feasible for her because of her current lifestyle to be able to then put everything on hold to become a caregiver. If she works in a career that she loves, she has minor kids, she might have a spouse, they may not have the space for you. It's
Financial obligations.
oh, and yeah, financially, they may not be just in a position to do that. So again, it's having these conversations. We got to start talking in our communities. We got to start talking within our families so that we all on the same page.
One thing that I wanted to sort of address that I just know from personal experience, a lot of people sort of imagine that aging is this steady decline that happens, and you see it happening and you notice, oh, I walk slower and slower. And what I have found is that somebody has a heart attack or a stroke or some sort of major event, or you don't even realize your immune system isn't as strong as you thought it was until you get the flu, and then you end up in the hospital from the flu and you get pneumonia and you're like, well, where did this come from? And grandma, who, you just ran into at Walmart and, she was fine, you helped her get her groceries to the car and sent her on her way, now can't make it to the bathroom on her own.
Absolutely. I think we got to get out of that mindset of, oh, as I get older, I'll slow down. I've seen young people, we have people now in their late 40s, early 50s getting vascular dementia. We have people getting a stroke in 45 or having a heart attack at 50. So we cannot sit around and say, okay, well, put that off. That's for down the road. We have no idea how our health is going to fade. And I've seen people young, vibrant, traveling, and you be like, oh, she is aging so well. And the next day she is not even able to like walk or talk anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk to you a little bit about life insurance because you talked about young people. And I really want to kind of particularly talk to young people who have children and loved ones, people who are buying homes. One thing that I made sure to look at when I bought my life insurance plan is, if I pass, will my life insurance plan pay off my house? Because I cannot imagine that my husband would be in any state to go to work if I were to suddenly pass.
And life insurance, people need to look at life insurance as a tool. It is an amazing tool. It is a tool that can be used to create generational wealth. It is a tool that can be used to pay for kids' colleges. You get an early policy on a child and then it has cash value that you can pull out later and pay for them to go to school.
Like, a lot of people don't even know that. Explain what that means. Like, how does life insurance have cash value?
Yes. So you're paying into this policy, but it's almost like it's on piggy bank, if you will. So it's building up and there's money there that you can then get almost like a loan against and be able to pull that, which is a lot cheaper than these student loans. So, without the interest rate, and you be able to use that money and do whatever it is, pay for college or, whatever, buy a house, whatever, when those children become older, because you've already been pouring into that policy. So that's just one of the many tools that you can use. You can, earmark that money when you pass away to pay off property. So your family's not laden with trying to figure out how they're going to continue to pay this mortgage. You get a policy that's enough to replace your income. Typically, younger people, I say you need to have more insurance, really heavy on insurance as you're younger and you have minor children, because your spouse and your kids are going to need to replace whatever money you brought into the home if you passed away. As you age and you see your children are older, they got their own families, they've made some wealth for themselves, then you may want to adjust your insurance. They maybe not have as much.
Well, also, if you're buying full life policies and you buy them early in your children's life, by the time your children are adults, those policies are making dividends that continue to pay your premium. So you're no longer paying for a policy that you don't have to get rid of. That policy, it's paying for itself, and your children will still benefit from it. And you can use the money that you were putting into that policy for the things that Nicola is about to tell us about.
And the reality is, like, life insurance is, you can find great policies for very little bit money. People keep thinking, oh, I don't have the money for that. I don't have the money for that. Your car insurance is probably costing you way more than a life insurance policy.
Yeah.
And so you really need to think about that. Is like, do I want to leave them this mess, or do I want to leave them some funds that they can now get ahead and not have to deal with the burden of whatever debt I left behind?
Right.
Because listen, people, when you die, your stuff don't just magically disappear with you. People sometimes seem to think that. And I'm like, there's a whole process of putting all your creditors on notice, because they're going to want their money too. So you don't leave your family trying to sort all that out. By having policies in place that say, okay, there's some cash, here's the money that we can figure out what needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's so important, just to create those assets, because you can, for a relatively little amount of money per month, you can put your children in a position as if you had left them a house.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and it's nowhere near the cost of your mortgage. And they can build a brand new house with the money that was left to them in a life insurance policy. And honestly, until I talk to my bookkeeper every month, I don't even notice that the life insurance money is
It's
gone.
so small. Yeah, it's so small. I had a
Yeah.
great friend, his father had the forethought and he left each of his kids $1 million policy. It
Wow.
changed his life, the grandkids, like it's changed
Yeah.
generations.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of stuff you can do.
Because
Say,
you
I
just
want to leave
created a
a legacy.
whole group of millionaires overnight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally overnight. And I mean, of course, nothing can replace your parent,
Absolutely.
but you will never forget. If you thought you were gonna forget before that, you will never forget the position that your parent left you in. And okay, so let's talk about that now, because a lot of people might say, my kid don't need $1 million.
Listen, we get that. I mean, that's real. Some people are like, I don't want a million is a
But
lot of
I
money.
mean,
But
yes,
it's
but
not,
think about how quickly money
it's not
is
right.
deflating. Like $1 million, and by the time, like, I plan on being here another probably 60, 70 years. Yeah, and
It won't
so
be worth much. And the
yeah.
cost of living continues to increase. So you got to take inflation in mind when you're like, okay, $1 million feels like a whole lot of money. It really isn't. And by the time, I have minor kids, for example, by the time they're adults, maybe college will cost $1 million. It keeps going up. So maybe I'm only going to be able to afford 4 semesters of college if I left them $1 million.
And I did, this number is super old. I think it's probably almost 10 years old by now, but probably around 2011, 2012, the cost of raising a child in Florida, which is a relatively inexpensive state in comparison to most states, was a
Mhm.
$250,000.
So you see very quickly
So
that
if
can
if you have 4 kids, that
be.
money is gone before if you have 4 kids and you pass when your youngest kid is 2, because you can't predict that,
Yeah.
then that's just enough to raise them.
Yeah. And so people, I think, just need to start taking all of that into consideration. There is nothing that burns me more than to see a GoFundMe or a fish fry trying to put some money together to bury somebody when that person could have had a life insurance policy
Mhm.
that did not cost them a whole lot of money. So now your family isn't able to just grieve and mourn the fact that you passed on. Now they're trying to scramble and pay bills. Like it doesn't
I'm
have
gonna tell
to
y'all, my term
come.
life policy, I'm just gonna put it out there. My term life policy, I think is a $250,000 policy. It's like $30 a month.
Yeah. And that's what I think people don't understand. I'm like, it's the cost of a meal, y'all. Like you was gonna spend $30 probably at
Easily.
a restaurant.
So I mean and full life policies are a little more expensive than that, but literally you can, and then like my term life policy is actually convertible into a full life policy. So I have a policy that if I get close to my 20 years and I'm nowhere near death, I can then convert my policy into something that's going to cover me long term. And
Yeah.
so if let's say you just started your first job out of, when you're done with school, you can literally cover yourself in the event that you're in a car accident so that your parents aren't worried about not only the fact that they lost their child, but about how they're going to financially cover all the things that come with it, because funerals are expensive. And so,
Medical bills, all of that
yeah.
will have to be taken into consideration. So if you don't want to leave your, and I keep telling people, if you don't want to leave them a mess, there are things you can do now. And think about that legacy that you leave when you have everything already like in place. Everybody is remembering you with such positivity. They're just like, wow, Sarah had life insurance. Everything was paid off. We didn't have to stress about it. We didn't have to worry about it. Sarah had a will. We knew exactly where she wanted all her stuff to go. We didn't have to stress about it. In the middle of her fighting an illness, we knew exactly what her wishes were. She told us. So we just communicated that to the doctors and they was able to just do what they had to do. And now we just get to mourn Sarah and we just get to say, wow, like she was a great person.
Mhm.
Instead of saying dang, we were
This is such a
scrambling.
burden.
Yeah, we were scrambling. We didn't know where the money was going to come from. We left feeling all this guilt because we didn't know what she wanted medically. So we pulled the plug, but we don't know if that's what she wanted. So, you can take all that burden off your family if you just put the planning in place.
Right. And then also, I think it's important to mention, if you have a business, this is super important,
Huge.
because if you don't have a succession plan for your business, and particularly if you have employees,
Yes.
if you pass on the 20th and it's no plan for how payroll is supposed to go on the first, the people who have devoted their time and who you've become friends with and all those people will not be able to pay their rent and their mortgage.
I literally just saw this. I got a phone call. A guy owned a auto shop, a very small auto shop, him and his wife, and he got COVID. And there was no plan in place. And the wife is calling me because she's like, I don't know how to run payroll. I'm not in the business. And he did eventually die. And there was no plan for the business, the employees. He's got vendors because he's ordering car parts from all these vendors who are just like, well, how do we get paid?
Right, because he has accounts payable.
Yes, exactly.
And then he also probably has accounts receivable, but nobody even knows somebody owes him money.
Right. And so now the wife is left trying to scramble and figure this all out. And again, she wasn't in the business. So the day-to-day of everything, she has no idea.
Yeah. All right. I don't want to end on a sad note. Tell
Okay,
us something.
Okay,
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, what you want to talk about so that people can feel, empowered.
So what I think what I kind of want to end on is the difference. Once you've put this in place, the difference in the level of security, because that's what a lot of us seek, right? We seek to be secure. What change do you see in your clients once they've done the hard thing and made these decisions? How is that? What's your perception of that?
It's almost like a burden on their shoulder has been lifted that they didn't even know they were carrying. And so many times my clients be like, oh, this was easy. And I'm like, what did you think it was going to be? Like, at the end of the day, I'm the one that does the drafting. I'm the one sitting in my office, making all those types of, making it come to life. You just need to take the time to think through, hey, who are the key players in my life? Who are the people I super trust and I want them to be able to, go to the bank on my behalf? Who are the people that I want to leave my things to? That's the hard part for you. Then I'll give you some advice on how to get everything in order, how to organize your documents so your family's not doing this scavenger hunt. We see so many times when somebody passed away and the kids are just like, I don't know who they owe. I don't know who the mortgage company. And so I'm like, you got to be a detective trying to figure this out. So we help our clients organize that so their family doesn't have to be detectives trying to figure out who owe them money, who don't owe them money, who they owe money, and that type of stuff. So it's a light feeling after it's over. It's like, wow, like if I can run out here and go run in the streets because if I get by the bus, my family good. Like
it's like, no, grandma, don't do that.
Don't do that, y'all. But yeah, so, and I tell my clients, it's not a one and done. Let me also be very clear. I want to make sure I put this out there. Every 3 to 5 years, you need to revisit your documents. So much happens in our life and life moves so fast now. You get a divorce, you adopt kids, you hit the lottery, like you go bankrupt. It can all happen in 3 years, real talk. And so you want to make sure that your documents are evolving as your life is evolving.
Particularly if there are other aging people. If you left everything to your husband and then your husband passed, you need to update your documents.
Where do you want it to go next? Who do you want? I see a lot of times other family members, you wanted to leave them stuff, they've now already passed away, but you've gotten really close with these people at your church, or there's this nonprofit that you've been volunteering with, and you're like, I would want to leave them something too. So we just need to keep the documents current to where you are in life. That's it. So yes, it is a wonderful light feeling of all is well. If it's my time and I'm gonna check out, I know that my family's gonna be good.
Yeah, they can be at peace.
Yeah.
All right. So if somebody wants an estate plan in your area, how do they get in touch with you?
All right, disclaimer, y'all. You got to be in the state of Georgia. So if you have auntie, cousins, everybody else in Georgia, call them and send them to me. Or if you decide to relocate from Florida to Georgia, call me. But you can reach our office at 404-410-6505. And that number is 404-410-6505.
And I know your podcast advice is pretty much good across state lines, even though it's not legal advice, but tell us one more time how to find your podcast.
Yes, and I definitely encourage everybody to check out the podcast because, again, it is helping you have that conversation with your family. It's the stuff you need to look for. We talk about dementia. We talk about this, exercise. We talk about all those things that your aging parents need to really be tuned into. And they might not be on the internet like you are. They might not be as tech savvy. So you need to get the information so you can take it back to them. So it's again called Black Parents Aging, and you can find it on Apple or any other podcast platform.
All right. It was so great having you on, Nicola. I really appreciate you being with us today.
I love it. I am happy to do this. Again, the more Black communities learn this information, the more we can secure our wealth and the more we don't have to worry about Big Ma House going to squander.
Exactly. All right. This is Love in Public.
Just there, freedom. Yeah. Hey. We'll believe in freedom, cannot rest. We'll believe in freedom, cannot rest until it's won. We'll believe in freedom, cannot rest. We'll believe in freedom, cannot rest until it's won. We'll believe in freedom, free the rest. Yeah, yeah. We'll believe in freedom, but free the rest. Hey. You gotta love your brother, support each other, hold each other.